Okie dokie, we are back and better than ever, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight and welcome back to the We Shall Not Sleep podcast. I have greatly appreciated all the support and followership over the last few months. We haven't had as many guests as we did earlier this year. This is due to illness, scheduling difficulties, and simply life just getting in the way. For many of you, this will be a welcome sign as we are returning to that function tonight with a special podcast. And I guess even better news for a lot of you, I won't be doing much of the talking tonight. So that might be a positive thing. But I think you'll enjoy tonight's topics. But before we get there, I just want to give a shout out to all the platforms. Give you guys the credit you deserve. Our hosting site, SoundCloud, our YouTube channel, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm so very grateful for those apps and those websites being able to continue to support us. Please check out our news updates on Facebook and follow along wherever you like to listen to your podcast. All right, so tonight's episode is rather special. I had the privilege of sitting down with both Annette Ridenour from the That's What I Thought podcast and Pastor Adam Deckard. Both of them are making a return appearance for this show. Annette, along with her husband Micah, if you remember, host conversations about relationships, culture, and communication that focused on Christ and the church. So please go check out their podcast. That's What I Thought. Pastor Adam Deckard, my good friend, he's a part of my D group, if you remember. He is a youth ministry director at Sterling Nazarene Church in Sterling, Colorado. He's a 2016 graduate of Olivet Nazarene University, along with Annette, and he is a member my D group. He was one of the founding members, which, if you want to know more about him, I'd encourage you to go check out interviews 14 and 15 to get to know him a little bit better. So, without further ado, please welcome Pastor Adam Deckard and Annette Ridenour. Excellent. Hey, guys, welcome to the We Shall Not Sleep podcast again. Guests Annette and Adam, thank you so much for coming back. How are you guys doing this evening?
I'm great.
Thanks.
Doing pretty good.
Both great at the same time as in unison. It's exactly like we practiced. This is not edited. This is just rehearsed. That's all. No, I'm so grateful for your time tonight. I hope that this can be an edifying conversation for many Christians, especially for us millennials. I know that a lot of the topics that we'll discuss tonight pretty much, I would say, affect maybe the younger Gen Xers, but pretty much millennials. And I mean, God forbid what the problems that are facing the Gen Z generation of people. But one of the things that I really wanted to get your insight tonight is about how how we define like relationships in this country and our culture that we've grown up in. All three of us went to Olivet. We were there at the same time, so we kind of have an understanding of this, young Christian culture and how we have grown up in it, and then being given expectations. We have to meet certain expectations, and if we don't, there's like this hourglass out in the ether somewhere that's ticking down. And if you don't meet these things, then you're somehow, doing it wrong. And one of those happens to be like relationships, whether you're in one or not in one. It seemed like you always had to have an answer. And I'm just wondering, in this particular culture, I believe we have an addiction to them, whether it's pressuring people to be in them or pressuring people while they're in relationships to have to do certain things. I'm just wondering, is there really an unhealthy addiction? I don't even know if there's a healthy addiction. But if we just say relationships, and I guess as we apply it to the church, do you think that is something that's creeped into our Christian culture as well, that we have this obsession with relationships? I'll start with you in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great conversation piece, and I would probably err on the side of also being obsessed with relationships because I love love. I think it's awesome.
Mhm.
So, I think it's important to define exactly what we're talking about because, like, obviously, we're speaking to a very niche group here. I mean, even in the introduction you're talking about, we're talking about, you know, 21st century, specifically probably millennials who grew up in the church, went through purity culture, the back end, had kind of this marriage expectation I think we're talking about like, whereas, for most of the world, that's not their situation. I mean, even in the rest of America culturally, they are more on the end of, sexual revolution, which is what that purity culture was like, you know, let's swing the pendulum. So you have those butting up against each other. So I think on the other end, you have like a group of people who are very much opposed to marriage relationships, which I think specifically we're talking here about like marriage, erotic, sexual relationships. Like
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
what we're talking about. So I think it's interesting, even in that, backing up and getting some perspective on this conversation to say, we are talking about specifically something a very small group of people has experienced, and especially like in the very broad sense of even what's happening around the world today, but also all throughout history. I mean, we're in a very unique situation where we get to choose the people that we're with. Like, we're not doing arranged marriages, we're not, enforceable marriages, hopefully. So, I mean, we're in a very, very unique space. And I think with that, that's where a lot of these challenging questions come from. And I think probably what some of that fixation comes from is there's a lot of pressure on you to make a decision to navigate waters that most of the culture has not, and most of history has not, and to do it in a way that is bringing glory to God. Not that I think, we should all have arranged marriages or whatever, but I think it's important to recognize, like, yeah, you are in a unique situation. So being frustrated with this is understandable. And at the same time, there's like a lot of blessings with that, because obviously, you get to choose, you get to find the people you like, you get to chase them down in your own unique way, do it in your own timing to an extent. Like, obviously, ultimately, you're not going to make a decision for another person, but to an extent, a lot of this is in your hands. So I think it's important to set the tone of this conversation in recognizing, like, yeah, we're in a really weird time in space, in history, internationally, even in Christian culture, with how we think about marriage and sexually intimate relationships. That's so different. So I think, of course, naturally there's fixation in the same way, like we have a fixation on technology, on social media, on internet, because we live in a post technological revolution age, post internet invention. And so things grow at this rapid pace. So I think there's a lot of things we are seeing there building up to this conversation. And a lot of that includes, we are post, I would say, post Christian culture and post monogamous marriage culture, post
Yeah.
sexual culture. So, like, 1950s church, 1950s nuclear family, I think that's typically the expectation maybe we felt like we had to do, because that was the path laid out for our parents. And so we perceive that as, like you had said, to make mom and dad happy. I mean, I think all of us here are overachieving good Christian kids. To make mom and dad happy, this is the path I should follow. And, part of that is you meet a nice Christian guy, you get married at a nice young age, and you start having babies. Like, that was kind of sold to us as the ideal, and in a really negative sense in the purity culture, in a way of saying, like, if I act this way, if I do these things, if I don't sin, if I follow these rules that God/my parents laid out for me in my mind, then God owes me this perfect relationship on my timeline, and we'll have the best sex ever, and we'll have the best relationship ever. And
Woof.
so that's not that's not to blame the people who were doing purity culture things. I mean, clearly that was not their heart's intention to have that be a side effect, and I don't blame them for that at all. But I think it's recognizing in us, like, our sexual purity isn't a bargaining chip for us to get a relationship. um, and I think some of the fixation in relationships is us trying to navigate all of that. So I wouldn't see a fixation on the relationship, to come back to your original question, as a negative thing in a sense. I think there's naturally a fixation on relationships in young adults in our psychology, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. There's naturally a fixation on relationships in the way that God has created us. Whether, even in your lifetime, if you're single your whole lifetime, you are still created as a sexual being. Like, you still have the parts, you still have the ability, you still have the desire. And there's a navigation of like, what do I do with that then? And then God questions come up with that. And like, if I have these feelings, if I have these desires and they're not going away and I'm praying about it and God's not giving me a wife, like, what am I doing wrong? Did I do something wrong? Am I being punished? And so all this to say, I think a fixation is normal. And I think a fixation is not bad. And that's how I would want to start this conversation, because I think in the overachieving evangelical millennial mindset, we just want to carry a lot of shame for that. But I don't think there's any shame for that. Like, I don't think that's God's heart for us, is to shame us for thinking we want to be in relationships and we're not.
Well said. I don't think we need to ask any more questions for the evening. No, I think what you're picking up on Annette is fantastic. I have a tendency to make broad statements, but in a way, in a leading question, it's nice to start out by defining, defining the relationship talk. No, uh,
Well, then,
but what you're getting at is like, is leaning into the natural things, but also competing with the expectations that our parents and the church as a whole places upon us, and then reconciling that with what God wants of us. And I think that's probably the most difficult angle, is that at the end of the day, when we have those urges, we have those desires, and when it's not being met, when your expectations are not being met by other people, your peer group in particular, when you want to please your parents when you're younger, then you leave for college, you want to please your peers, and you don't have an answer, you can feel as if you're doing something wrong, which can lead to a lot of pathways, one of which can be an obsession, unhealthy, and trying to fulfill other people's expectations. And another one could say, well, obviously that's not the plan for me right now. However, I'm going to continue to live my life for God, allow Him to guide my path. But that's the thing, is that ends up turning into a cliche, which can be a whole other form of temptation. Is, oh, God just hasn't brought you the right person yet. Yeah, well, no kidding. I don't know that already. So Adam, with what Annette is saying, she is putting things in context here. She's putting it, the question, in our terms, what we us three have grown up in. You and I have talked a lot about purity culture, and it's it's somewhat benefits of like the virtues of wanting to teach of certain values and still within them. Maybe it wasn't done in the right way. I fortunately was part of a church that did it, I think, in a very good way. But I also had Teresa Garner as my youth pastor, where there was a lot of great things from a very young age being instilled, and it was consistent. But you've shared with me stories of where that's obviously not the case. But what do you think, though, given what we've started out with? That do we as millennials and as Christians, do we have an unhealthy addiction or obsession with relationships, or are we just venting our frustration on something that, as Annette was saying, is completely natural? We're just burdened with different social issues because of technology and social media.
No, I think this is definitely a, I don't want to call it a coping conversation, but I do think it is a maybe more of a processing conversation, just kind of processing the processing what we grew up in. It's funny. Michael gave us a just a general outline of kind of what we were going to try and hit, and maybe four or five things, and I had taken a little bit to not a lot. I didn't write out a lot, but I wrote down some thoughts to keep me focused. And Annette, I have to say that you touched on probably a good portion of things for at least all four or five of those questions, which I think is good, because it's affirmation in my head of like, okay, that's a good talking point. That's a good thing to touch on. So thank you.
The difference is that Adam was a good boy and prepared ahead of time, and I was like, these are just my feelings. I'm going to talk.
Just because I just don't, me processing in real time makes for very bad radio, because Michael can attest, there's a lot of back and forth when I'm trying to figure out what I'm thinking. because I have to say something in order to figure out, no, that's not what I think. And then I backtrack, and then it's like, where did he go? Anyway.
Well, the beauty
So,
of it is I can edit all that in post and make you sound amazing. Like, how did
I
he
mean,
come up with that in like
that's
30
fair.
seconds?
You already
That's
sound
fair. Maybe I should, be in radio more often.
well,
But
the great part of that is that it's just a microcosm of this conversation, is that all relationships are extremely nuanced based on who you are, the individual. So
amen.
Yeah.
Amen. So the only thing that I will add to the initial broadening of this conversation, if we're kind of taking a step back, we're taking a look at kind of our we're trying to we're trying to figure out a good place to start, right? And the only other thing that I would add to that you briefly touched on, Annette, was like we are made, everyone is made in God's image. Everyone's made in God's image, and communion and community is at the heart of God's identity because of his triune nature. And because we were made in God's image, we obviously we desire community. We were made to be in community, and we not only long internally for a relationship with him, but with other people, right? So I think that and we're kind of narrowing our conversation to conversations within the church, so I won't get into like how people, I don't know if I want to get into, it's like, how do people outside of the church deal with that versus people inside, like, because there are different coping mechanisms. Like, we all desire community and we all want that. We all desire that. That's a desire that we all have. So people, they try and fill that. They try and fill that hole in different ways, I think. But I think for those who are in Christ, I think that it is still easy to make an idol out of relationships or the idealized relationship, what it means to be in a relationship. If being in a relationship, specifically a marriage, is this the epitome of intimacy, or is the highest tier that you can reach, that can be idolized, and almost as a cookie cutter to press on the community. And if you don't fit that cookie cutter, kind of like what Annette was saying, like you're somehow on the outside. And one thing, I might be jumping ahead of my own notes a little bit, but there was this, we kind of talked about the cultural context, and the 50s, into the sexual revolution, into purity culture, and all this different stuff. I think that a huge part of this conversation because Michael, you said a lot of this boils down to expectations, like what expectations are placed on us by the faith community. But I think that the expectations are a lack of adaptation due to the cultural changes that have happened around us, partially because of social media, but in large part because of the extension of adolescence. And I can't remember if I talked about this when we were briefly talking about youth ministry that one time that I was on, but the extension of adolescence, I think, has huge ramifications for this conversation, because people aren't getting married at 18 anymore. They're not having kids at 20. They're because of going to college, and then it takes longer to settle into a job, which takes longer to become more financially stable. People are more comfortable settling down when they're financially stable. So then they get married when they're late 20s, early 30s. Maybe they don't start having kids till their mid 30s, right? Because some people just have kids right out the gate, and some people wait a while. Some people don't have kids at all, which is another conversation of like, the ideal picture, the picture perfect family, and kind of the in our Western evangelical community is the mom, dad, 2 kids, right? So if you're not having kids, then what are you doing? But I feel like there are just so many more elements that have been added on in the recent years, and I think that we're slowly becoming more aware of people, or the conversation has shifted a little bit, I think, and people are more aware of just different preferences. Like, I feel like awareness of difficulties in getting pregnant and having kids um, are becoming more normalized. Like, um, I have several friends who either, either they can't have kids, or it's taken them a very, very long time to have kids, or they've really, really struggled with physical ailments through pregnancy, or all these different things. Like, we're just becoming more aware of these things. So the conversation is shifting less from, at least I think, is shifting less from like, hey, when are you going to have kids? And more like, do you feel like that's something that you want? Like, are you able to have kids? Like, is that, on the table kind of thing? It's a little more, I hope that's it's a bit more sensitive um, to that. I don't know.
It's just a conversation that, I mean, we wouldn't be able to solve all of it in one night, and I dare say
No.
solve anything. But the themes that we're talking about and we're touching upon is not just expectations, but it's things that we are, what Annette was saying, meant to do, I guess, as creatures. We're here to, well, procreate. I mean, if we want to boil down the purpose of our life here on earth, we're here to serve God, and we can serve God. Well, and Jesus is, very clear. If you love me, obey my commandments. Okay, well, we know what his commandments are. You just got to read the gospel. And then if you are seeking after him, you're in a relationship, you're in a marriage relationship, you're there, you have kids, you raise them, train them up to be Christians, and then there you go. There's purpose on the planet to save others and dedicate your life to Jesus. In the interim, where your life begins or where your life ends, and that you said it, like relationships. Well, of course, like relationships. That's what we're about. That's because we're relational people, and I love that passion. One of the things that I see as a direct result of this, of the expectation game, is the comparison game, which social media just exacerbates. And not that social media is bad. It's any tool, it can be used in horrible ways. I mean, sometimes it's great when a hammer hits a nail, but it's really bad sometimes when a hammer hits a baby. And that's the misuse of the actual tool. And we've talked about this definitely in D group, about the things that we see on social media, the things that we post, the things that we share with one another, even as Christians, can be very harmful. And sometimes we're naive of that fact. Annette, let me go back to you for a second. Just as a general question, how do you think social media has impacted the way we view relationships in this Christian subculture that we're in?
I think it's probably just it's a magnifying glass. And I mean, like you said, it's a comparison to where I need to be. And but again, it's not necessarily the tool's fault, right? I mean, these are all human user error things, and these things, I mean, they exist whether you're online or not. Like, if I was living in 1800 walking around my town and Jenny's married and I'm not, I'm still going to be mad about it. So like,
Right.
the
Exactly.
tool, I mean, the platform is just part of that. But I think, I mean, it's interesting because even in this conversation, we have very different stories when it comes to relationships. Like, Adam got married right out of college. I got married several years after college. Like, what I wanted to get married by the time I was 24, and I got married when I was 26. So, there's your expectation. Um, and Michael is living the single life. So, like, even all of these things, you have very different experiences. So, I mean, social media can be an avenue of that, but I mean, when I was single and lonely and really looking for somebody, like, church was just as difficult, especially have you seen the memes where, like, the last available guy at church shows up with a girl and you're like, no,
Uh,
my last hope is gone, and just can leave you in, it leaves you in a desperate place. And so all of these things are conversations with you and God. I mean, he has a unique story for you that's not going to look like anybody else's, period. I mean, whether that's you're feeling frustrated in your job, whether you feel frustrated in your friendships, your relationships, whatever it is. I mean, there's things that are going to bother you because you see that someone else has them and you don't. Like, I mean, I think that's part of being human, and relationships are just another avenue of that. I think there's a couple of different directions you can go with that. And I think probably multiple that you need to take. And I think one of them is to grieve. I think it's okay to be sad that you're not in a relationship in the timeline you thought you'd be. And I think God is happy to sit with you there and say, you know, like, clearly God knows the plan for your life and he's got good things, but he's able to resonate with what you're feeling and say, like, I'm so sorry your heart is breaking. Like, I'm so sorry, like, that you can't see what I see, that you don't see you the way that I see you, but like, I'm still going to sit with you and be where you're at. And then, I mean, the second thing is, to take a self inventory. Sometimes I think it's frustrating, and I'm not like saying this is everybody's case, but sometimes people aren't in relationships because we hold ourselves back because we've been taught some of this theology too, especially as a female, that the guy should come to you, he should ask you out, he should be pursuing you, you don't have to put yourself out there, like all of these kind of things. And so I think part of it too is evaluating, like, why am I responding the way that I'm responding? If I want to be in a relationship, like, you're probably going to have to go on dates, like, you're probably going to have to put yourself out there. I think that analogy where the guy's sitting on his roof in the flood and the boat comes by and he says, that's okay, keep going, God's going to send me someone. And then the helicopter comes by to get him, he says, that's all right, God's going to save me, and sends the helicopter away. And then the guy's going to drown, and God's like, the guy's like, what, God, why didn't you send me anyone? And God's like, I sent you so many people, like, you didn't do anything with what I sent you. And so I think part of it is, like, in our grief and our frustration with our relationship status, it can blind us to the opportunities that God is giving you. So I think, I mean, the same way you daily have to pick up your cross, you daily have to grieve and lay down the things that you thought you were going to have right now, and at the same time pick up the things he has for you today. And maybe that's putting yourself out there when it's uncomfortable. Maybe it's, hey, there are some things that I need to work on in my personal life, and like, I need to see a counselor and work some things out because there's these patterns in my relationships that are holding me back from good relationships, or I need to deal with this past hurt, or I need to deal with this expectation I have of the future. I mean, sometimes it's just idolatry of what we expect. And then you bring up your spouse into that, and suddenly they're supposed to fill this great gap and need in your life. And they're like, I'm only a person. Like, they're
Yeah.
going to continually disappoint you then,
Yes.
because you've said, all this time I've been waiting for you and you should be this great, awesome thing. And they're like, well, I'm doing my best, but I'm still human. So
Yeah.
Mm.
This is great, and I really appreciate that insight, because that you're talking about social media as a magnifying glass. Adam, I wonder if you'll agree with her take, because it's very easy to take social media and use it as a scapegoat, but the themes that Annette is talking about and the struggles, talking about like 19th century or whatever, yeah, the feelings of anger, sorrow, jealousy and misplaced expectations, and thinking that I don't know God should have me in a different place, because if I was God, I certainly wouldn't want me here. Those things have always existed, but yeah, social media has made it more ubiquitous in that comparison. I mean, you can see everyone's success, so yeah, it does amplify the feelings. So I would say it certainly plays a role, because I don't think we use it well. I don't think a lot of people use social media responsibly. That's just my personal belief. But what say you about social media? Are you with this understanding that it has worsened thing, but it's not the true root cause of this relationship angst that we have?
Mm. Can you clarify for me hmm. Can you clarify for me, like, to what arena are we speaking?
Yeah,
I
just
guess.
again, just the church. Like, how is social media exacerbated, or not played a role maybe in this search for relationships and this comparison game that we play with ourselves? I mean, I think of we did the eye test at Olivet because we were there, we were present. But since leaving college and not being around a lot of our friends, we still stay up with a lot of our friends through social media and through all of the social media apps that we use, whether that's dating apps too. We can still keep up with people. We can still see their failures and their successes to the degree that they want us to. Because I think the part that social media where it is a little bit new is the editing tool that social media provides. Is you're only getting the image of what people want you to see, whereas it's a lot more difficult to hide that in person. um,
Mm.
you can't hide. I mean, I would say in most social circles without technology, it's really hard to hide the grief or hide the your singleness or your displeasantries. Maybe you could do it for a little bit, but you'll find inconsistencies. Where social media, it's like my life's great even though I'm miserable on the inside.
Right, right. Man, I don't know. I have so much to say on social media, but I just don't want to go off on the wrong trail and talk about something completely different. But
Well, you're here we're here to record and talk, so I would not dissuade you from talking about it.
gotcha.
But I mean, yeah, social media in and of itself could be its own podcast that all three of us could talk into on a separate episode
Mm.
for sure. And I guess for this conversation though, like as far as how it affects our relationship thinking is really what
Yeah,
I'm after.
yeah. Honestly, I think that social media has really played a role in how we think relationships develop in the first place.
Ah, okay.
Like, because I mean, I think and again, this boils down to expectation. Like, it shapes our expectations of what relationships are going to be, what they're going to look like. We have our quote unquote like religious faith based expectations of what a relationship will be and what a spouse will be, which is what Annette was talking about. And like your husband or wife is only a person, like they can't meet those expectations. But I think it also plays into, again, like how the relationship forms in the first place. And I think we'll really start to see this more with younger generations. I know we're speaking more specifically about our generation, but like I think that like I think social media and our interaction with it and our dependency on it has, for some, eliminated certain or seriously deteriorated certain skills needed in order to build relationships. For instance, I have many friends who rely heavily on dating websites, which is not a bad thing. I have several friends and family members who have met their significant others via a dating app or website. It's a viable option in today's world, especially for bigger cities, or different places where it's just, again, like maybe that one single guy in your church is taken, right? What are you going to do? It's a good option. Social media is, this thing that I keep going back to and just in my discussions about social media is that it's utopia and dystopia at the same time. It's so cool that you can find someone on an app and you share mutual interests. You already have kind of a lot of this like basic information out of the way. Like I know this, and this about a person, and I can take a step toward that person, knowing that we already share some of these same values and all these different things. I think that's great. But I think it also can be a crutch in just like, it's a huge handicap for just learning how to take those baby steps with a person, like small talk, for instance, or um uh I was thinking about this the other day too, like even just like memorizing information. I can count on one hand how many of my friends I actually know their birthday, and the rest of them Facebook just tells me. Why is that important? I think that, between like phone numbers and birthdays and favorite foods and these little things that, like, as you get to know a person, you commit these things to memory because they're important, right? Like, and you committing that to memory shows that like you care about that person. Like Emily would probably be upset if I didn't know her birthday or our anniversary or like what some of her favorite snacks were. Just like those little things that like show that, yes, like I've been listening. We are living this life together. Like I care, and so tying that back to social media, I think that, man, I don't know. I think we've just like, how do you be curious about a person if all those little things are taken care of on the front end, I guess. Like, I think that sometimes it handicaps our ability to be curious about a person. Like if you're not curious about your spouse, like continually curious, like that's a problem. Like a relationship stagnates or dies the minute that you stop being curious about another person. And I genuinely believe that we've lost part of our ability to like just take interest in another person. And like I am constantly, when I'm with my students, when I'm with people at church, I'm constantly going through my head and it's like, okay, what question do I ask them next? What did they tell me last week that they were doing? And what, like, how could I ask them a question that would, whatever. Like I have a student who loves racing. What can I ask him about racing? Or like, I know nothing about racing. What do I ask him? So it's like when we're talking about the development of relationships, be they romantic or non, but I feel like specifically it helps in, it can help in romantic relationships. Like it skews our ability. It skews our ability to connect, and what we think is connection is this. It's not a false connection, but it somehow seems diminished.
Yeah.
Does any of that make sense?
No, it does, because that leads into, like, if that's true, and I don't know, and that if you wanted to respond to what he's saying here, because I think for what Adam has just said, that starts this inner longing that even though we want, even though we got what we wanted, it's still not fulfilling this inner desire in our soul, which is what you were saying in a way, is like, why isn't this person fulfilling this need? But because I was told this entire time that that's what the answer was. I mean, I don't know. I don't know about you in particular, Annette, but that's something when you said that, I'm like, well, yeah, I think that's probably the issue, is that when we look for, the whole Jerry Maguire, the "you complete me" type of mentality, like, I don't think that wasn't the point. I think complimentary, but like, we're not supposed to complete one another. If we complete one another, and from my understanding, of course, this is very naive, because I haven't had the experiences you two have had, that we're supposed to be completed and our fullness, with God first, because when we look at the way Jesus, for example, I don't think anyone would look at him and say his life was unfulfilled, or any of the disciples who were not married, like, oh, if only they had a good woman in their lives. Uh, I think we could say that about a lot of guys who are single, lack a lot of self awareness, but I don't think we're gonna say that about Christ. So, and that, what do you think about that? Is that where is that mentality of, and maybe this lie saying the other person is supposed to complete me? Where is that coming from?
I have so many thoughts on all of these things. I First of all, I want to build off of what Adam said, because I think that I definitely agree with the issue that he's seeing. I wouldn't necessarily point the finger entirely at social media as much as I would the family. Um, and I will come back to that. But I think so after college, like, I was like sad for a while, and then I moved on from being sad to being like, I would like to be in a relationship. So then I changed my philosophy to, I'm going to go on as many dates as possible, because what am I good at? I'm good at meeting people and talking to strangers. So I mean, that's what Adam is seeing, is a generation of kids who aren't super good at meeting people or talking to strangers in person. They're really great at like talking to friends online and like playing games with people they don't know. But when it comes to relationships where there are risks, it's really difficult for them to walk into that space. So I think pro social media, one of the great things I thought is like after college, like there were so many people I got to keep up with. And like, hey, I wasn't on any dating site specifically, but I had all my social media to be like, these are people I already have relationships with. And maybe I never thought as a viable option before. Cause I think, you got to have the right place, the right time, and the right person. And that means like you and that person are at the same place, being equally yoked, meeting at that same route. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of things that have to happen for this to work, which is a miraculous thing. So like I don't really know how people do it without God. I guess, that's why so many relationships don't work. But
There
I
you
think
go.
one of the things is like being able to have your code, your expectations, your forethought as you go into those relationships. Because I think one of the things that I see, especially with students that I work with, is that when I ask them about, um, sexuality, and if that's like something that's weird and confusing to them, so much different than when I was in high school, they're like, oh yeah, like it's fine. I'm not worried about it. Like they have like so much less shame, I would say, in like talking about it and being around it. And I think that's probably because the sexual conversation is at the front of their school conversations in like a different way because of the culture, and in a way that's talking about like gender identity, um, which is a different conversation. But like they're so much more comfortable talking about relationships and the idea of these things. I think one of the things that we still believe is that consumerism narrative, which we see in everything. I mean, we see it in church, we see it in these relationships. So when I'm online looking for someone, when I'm sliding into their DMs, it's still not about, me loving this person, serving this person. It's about what is this person going to give to me? And what that technology is, whether it's there or not, I think this is a pre-existing issue.
Yeah.
But the fact that we are accustomed to everything serving us, to everything being personalized to us, and everything meeting what we want, then the person on the other end of that conversation is disposable, period. Like, and the fact that the risk level goes way down when I'm using social media, like I don't have to break up with them. I just have to ghost them, and
Yeah.
I can block them and not tell them why, and it's done. No risk necessary. And I think like that's the approach that is deteriorating those relationships. Like that's the approach that's unhealthy. If you go into the mindset of, I'm going to use my social media to build these relationships, to build these connections, to get to know people, and the way Adam said, like I'm scrolling through their feed, oh, they like skiing, like I'm going to ask them out on a date in person. We're going to have coffee and be chill. Like I'm not going to have this expectation that, we're going to get married, but I'm going to ask them, I saw you like skiing. What's that like? Like, I don't know how to ski. Why do you like it? I think it's being able to use social media as what it is, which is a superficial layer, and say, I know this is a superficial layer. Like, I know this person isn't like presenting every deep, dark secret on social media. And I hope that they're not. Like, that would be a red flag to me. Be like,
Yeah.
heavens, like this
Yeah.
person is sharing way too much with strangers. Like they're clearly looking for validation. But like to take that superficial level and almost, use it as your small talk propeller and be like, hey, I know based on this person's profile, we probably do have some things in common, or we definitely don't. So either I'm going to ask this person out or I'm going to not. And then in that conversation, like, hey, at least, I have some conversation starters, some things they might actually like. But when you go into it with, you've already stalked them on social media and now you're sliding into the DMs, but you're not going to take any risks in that relationship by asking them out. You're just going to talk to them until you get bored, or they don't meet your expectation, or
Yeah.
they're not serving you in the way they want, even if that's, they're not sending you any crazy pics. Like, I feel like that's a lot of the stereotypical high school boy narrative. Like, when they're not sending me pics and I'm done with them, like I'll just ghost them. Like that's the issue. I think it's not the technology, it's that we're not prepared to be vulnerable in our relationships. And I think that comes from um, I think it comes from the lack of character development, the lack of discipleship in your life.
Yeah.
And so, you see people who aren't in the church doing that. I mean, it's the same way of like, of course I don't expect that from them. Like they don't have the fruit of the spirit in their lives. They're not like trying to be made holy. But like if you see someone online who's following Jesus, like I feel like that is a great place to confront them and being like, you can't just slide into someone's DMs and then ghost them. Like you are a new creation in Christ. Like you have to be vulnerable. You have to take risks. You have to be honest and have those real conversations. You can't just like be like, sorry, I'm out. Like that doesn't work. You have to have more boldness and bravery in that.
Yeah, you bring up, oh my gosh, you bring up such good points. Yeah, relationships involve risk. That's exactly what I was thinking. I was talking, or when Adam was talking, is that yeah, it's we're not willing to take that next step, and it's very narcissistic. It's a very consumer culture. It's like, what can you do for me? And when you can't do anything for me, then you're done. What do you do with a product that you're done with? You throw it away or you sell it, and that's something that that I have fallen prey to, unfortunately. Adam, I saw you shaking your head a little bit during what Annette is saying. Is this something I'm curious because of your connection with the youth as well? Like, are you seeing a more comfortable nature with younger people in regards to sexuality? And are you also seeing this consumerism really plague relationships for our generation?
Hmm. It's funny. I don't think I'd really thought about until she said it that much. I admit that I struggle to have as much as I feel like it's a necessity and it's important. I've in the short time that I've been doing youth ministry, I struggle greatly with how to address sex and sexuality, um, partially because of the maybe the puritanical nature in which I was brought up, but also the um I don't know, like they are so much open. They are so much more open to it. And like, because that is the forefront of our conversation and we need to be speaking into that conversation. I honestly haven't had many of those conversations with any of my kids, so I can't really speak to that as much. But I do see the conversations happening, or I do see, obviously the cultural conversation happening, and I can see why that would be a thing. But with the
Consumerism.
consumerism, yes, thank you. With the consumerism, I think that what was it with the consumerism? There was
Well, the
what
social
was it that
media,
she said?
let's say so. I'll let you say it, Annette.
You
What
were
is
just saying.
consumerism? The airline food.
I was trying to think. There was an avenue of wait, I think I remember. Yeah, I feel like the consumerism in relationships is and the word that I kept thinking of was just objectifying. It's just
Yeah.
it's incredibly objectifying to the person. When if you're using this as a potential to like just kind of scope out, like, is this something that I want? Is this something like using people as a disposable resource, as you were referring to. um um I lost it again. Hold
Wait,
on.
sidebar. Is there also maybe some correlation, but not necessarily causation connected there with why sexuality is such an easier conversation for them, but pornography continues to rise?
Yeah.
Right.
Valuing the gender of people, but continuing to exploit people. I don't know.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I always think, and for anyone that might be from the older generations listening to this too, um, the this is not. I mean, you mentioned Anna, like the puritanical culture and the approach to sex. Like, I don't disagree with anything that I was taught about sex. In fact, a lot of the stuff was factual about like what is expectations as far as what Scripture teaches, and then what decisions lead to healthier relationships. I think a lot of the facts, like and here is what is good. Here's what leads to healthiness. I think all those, at least for me, were great things that I agree with. However, how they were reinforced is, I think, where we could see a lot of areas for improvement. Um, and then the application of those things, which I know something, Adam, in particular, you've shared, just for the older people. it wasn't always applied in the best way. Public declarations to a lot of people about your chase for purity, I don't think are the best things, because I think that can shame a lot of people and peer pressure and people into it. And I don't like the word pure anyway, because I think what that implies is that anyone who is, like, for example, not a virgin before they get married, that they're somehow impure. And I'm like, okay, if we're going to discuss purity when it comes to sex, like, well, all of us have fallen short of the glory of God, so none of us are pure. So I don't even like that word. I would like to apply that to Christ's blood. That's the only thing pure that's been in this world, is the thing that can deliver us from all sin. So I don't even like using that word, pure. Because every time I look in the mirror, it's like, oh yeah, look, I'm gonna die someday. Why? Because it's a product of sin, but God's redeemed it, but I'm still gonna die because there's sin in the world, and it's like this never-ending avalanche, that I see. Um,
Right.
but Adam, we mentioned this. We mentioned this last week on D group, that we talk about social media and consumerism. That sometimes, unfortunately, like, Christians can feed into that by what we post, that's a whole other conversation. But like, are we
Mhm.
using this tool with discernment and wisdom? And that brings up a great point just about what social media can do for relationships. Are we building it as the foundation, where it is going to be more objectifying, in my opinion, and I think all of our opinions, or can it add into a foundation? Like, hey, I'm going to go on a date with a girl, like you said, Annette, and I find out, she likes skiing. Well, I could see, based on her social media presence, by, for example, the pictures that she posts of herself on her profile. Like, oh, modest. Oh, okay, it's not pornographic. Well, that's good news. Like, hey, she shared this, or like, hey, you can tell by the language that she does or doesn't use it. Hey, look, at she surfs or skis. Those are things you can take and put in the back of your head, saying, remember that, remember that. But like, if I'm going to try to build a relationship all on the stuff that she wants me to see, not that stuff that's not that is even fake, it can be true. It can be but it's a sliver. It's a sliver of what the life is. But when we are limited on Twitter, or we are just posting one, maybe a couple times a week, again, that's stuff that we want people to see. So how do you, I don't know how you do. No wonder it doesn't work out. People build a foundation on social media.
Mm.
Ponder that, listeners.
Yeah. Man. I mean, like, it's, the social media being the utopia and dystopia at the same time,
I like that,
in
by the way.
that
I
it
like that.
can be such, and is such a useful tool. I think I have a tendency to go to the negatives, partially because of social media's influence in my own life. So I have my own experience there. That's kind of, I don't want to call it jaded, but it's just, I'm I'm in a season right now where I'm trying to back away from it. So because I've recognized the drawbacks in my life, and I'm kind of in a position where I'm trying to help, not only students but older adults as well, and like try and navigate it, because no one teaches us how to navigate social media, which is in part why we're having this discussion. But like, and again, like, that could be its own podcast, and that could be, a million podcasts or whatever. But
Yeah.
I just think that, um, I have seen social media turn into a coping mechanism that, like, it's a coping mechanism that, like, we end up we end up feeling more comfortable with a machine than we do with a person.
Yeah.
And if that is the narrative in your marriage, if that's the narrative in your relationship, if all of your in between moments, are devoured by social media use, and instead of spending time with your significant other, or what have you, and it's not all dire warnings or anything, but it's just it's I personally am trying to bring awareness to the imbalance, because I had an imbalance in my own life. So I see couples who are out to dinner and they're both on their cell phones, not even talking to each other. It's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you here? Like, put the phone down and actually connect with the person that you're trying to connect with. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And and there's definitely an element of, I know a popular thing to do, because of all the media we consume, we like to share media. We like to share media with one another. Um, um, but there's a difference between sharing media that makes us laugh and sharing what makes us tick, if for lack of a better term. I mean, not
Yeah.
to say that you can't learn from, like, you get to learn about people's sense of humor or these different things, but like, I don't know, it's interesting for sure. um I have seen social media used very well, and I've also seen it used very poorly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It ultimately this what we're talking about here, which is kind of the heart of what I wanted to talk about tonight. Um, because I think your perspectives will help at least one person I know out there. Is this ever increasing, feeling of loneliness, maybe of dread? Because if you're even not a Christian, I don't know what people who aren't Christians live for anymore. I think you're seeing in this country the widespread and disparate views on politics and social stances, and the increased um, polarization of what people do with their own bodies, whether it's you're talking about medical decisions, or we talked, you mentioned it earlier, in that gender identity, that the increased polarization is getting farther and farther apart. So it's finding like the little social circles, like, do I have to change my friend group every time that we have another thing that we have to like draw a line in the sand on? And when you comes to relationships, somebody you're trying desperately to connect with, and maybe you get married to, or maybe not, um it's something that I've, for the first time in my life, I've had to just admit here in the last couple of weeks, that I am really like struggling with loneliness. And I'm not the only one. This desire for companionship is not, it's not like non-biblical. It's something we talked about. It's built in. And what I struggle with truly is, like, as a pastor, like, I want to be fully devoted to my church and my flock, and I want to shepherd them well. And I say I don't want to be burdened by a relationship, not because it's a burden, because people say like, oh, well, you'll find the right woman. They'll encourage you and be able to add to it, not take it away. Like, oh, that might be well and good. But I really struggle with Paul's words in First Corinthians. I really struggle with that. I look at Jesus and the life he led, and it's like, no, again, no one's going to say that they lived unfulfilled lives because they didn't have sex. Which is the thing, if I maybe an expectation in marriage that, okay, now that I have this thing, and now that I can have sex in a healthy way, now my life is somehow complete. It's fuller than it was before. And if it doesn't meet that expectation, I can't imagine the um, depression or just the sorrow that one might experience when they've been told this is what you have to do if you're a Christian. And once you get it, that's the pinnacle of life. And maybe they don't come out and say that, but that's what my grandparents did. That's what my parents did. And then when you get it, you're like, that's it. like is that this is what I'm meant to do? Now I'm supposed to become a mother or a father for 40 years, that I die, and then I'm like, what? That's it? Um, so like I'm struggling with that dichotomy of like, what am I supposed to do? And I guess the part where I am privileged is I have, by the way, I have this person's permission to share this briefly, is I have been in love. I have known what it's like to have been loved by somebody that did not put any expectations on the relationship, that I felt completely safe and secure with, and I could be myself. And I felt that, and that I wouldn't say I'm not going to be like Romeo and Juliet, and it was ripped away from me, and it was never meant to be. No, that's not the point. Is I felt that, and I long for that again. I do. Um, that's just not, obviously not what has been meant to be at the moment. There's I'm supposed to be over here in another lane, which I hate, but I'm grateful for. At the same time, it's unfortunate. I guess what I'm sharing from my heart for those people who are out there is that, listen to Annette. I think she should just take over hosting this podcast. Is that it's okay to grieve. I've had to grieve that loss. In fact, I've dated other women only to realize what I had been chasing is how I felt a couple relationships back, because I was either in it for the consumeristic nature, or I was in it just to have it. So I could have something, someone to hold or someone to hold me because I was feeling lonely. Which imagine that those relationships didn't work out. I mean, who would have thought? And all the while I'm thinking, oh, I actually have the foundation here. I know what it actually feels like. So I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the blessed ones to have had that. And if I'm never in a relationship like that ever again, at least I had it. And I'm thankful for it. I'm no longer angry. But it took a while. But here's the thing, that loneliness that I feel, that angst, that dread, I understand that that's not just people who are single. I know I've talked to people, and there's been testimony from others who they've been in relationships, but they've never felt more alone. They never, I mean, talk about neglect. I mean, it's one to feel lonely when you're by yourself, but when you feel that loneliness and neglect when another person, like Adam, what you're saying, no longer is curious about you. Oh my gosh, what a prison that must be. So I have to ask you two, now that I've shared just my brief thing, how do you combat that loneliness? How do you and this not an indictment on your spouses, by the way. No, by no means. It's just, you know, I mean, I know Emily Deckard, for example, really well. I know that Adam's not struggling with relationships and loneliness, and I don't know Micah there, Annette, but I trust and I can see the fruit in your marriages. But how? But those times, I know that those times exist. Talking to my parents, talking to my grandparents, that there are those moments where, whether it's due to not getting your own way, or maybe you felt you were hurt, the other person, accidentally hurt you, or they forgot something at the store, and it's like, oh, why didn't you just listen? Why couldn't you just listen to me? This those things that couples go through. How do you struggle or I'd say, how do you struggle, but do you maybe you do struggle with any sort of loneliness, or your advice, I guess, to people if you can't relate directly to fight against loneliness even while they're in relationships? Annette, I'll throw it to you first.
So many feels. I'm gonna pull up my glasses so you can see my eyes, so that you know that I see you. I I'm so sad. I could, like, I'm not a crier, but I could cry for you right now, because I feel that, and I know that pain. And obviously I don't know your situation, but I know that pain, because I'm someone who really, I mean, I crave attention. I love to be the center of attention. I love affection. Like, physical touch is my love language number one. Like, no, no competition. I mean, words of affirmation is pretty high up there too. But both of those can make you really, desperate for relationship. And when somebody fills that gap and then they're no longer there, I mean, it's a massive loss. And it doesn't matter the situation. It's crippling. And yeah, I mean, I guess the best I can do is just share a little bit of my experience, and to speak to that loneliness, because it is so real. I mean, and I think there was a lot of difficulties for me not feeling like I really connected socially in college. And I think, and I would love to share some of this too. When I graduated, I started listening to Julie Slattery, who talks about God's design for sexuality, and I love her. She has been just a great online mentor for me, like single to married, whatever. She's been awesome, because she just very openly will talk about sexuality, and God's design for it in a way that's so freeing and honest and raw. And I feel like, especially when I've been in that situation, like, one of the things, I'm just like so thirsty for information, for knowledge, for like understanding of what that is. And like, part of the frustration I feel like is like the church doesn't always know how to give that in a way that's helpful. And mentors and spiritual mothers and fathers seem to be so rare that it's like I just am craving that information. I don't know where to get it. So like, I definitely feel for that too. But I mean, there's a sex therapist. His name is Doug Rosenthal, and I can send you his name later. But he dives into this so well. I mean, he just wrote a book about singleness and sexuality. I think it's called like Single and Sexually Whole, and just this whole conversation that we are designed by his definition to be socially sexual as well as erotically sexual. And kind of like how in English we only really have one word for love, we don't really understand the complexities of our sexuality within relationships. So like we've been taught that, like sex is just intercourse, just like genitals rubbing together, and that's sexuality, when like your sexuality is so much more than that. And to be erotically sexually intimate is an amazing metaphor, an amazing part of relationship, an amazing illustration of God's design for like being known entirely and thoroughly and not being rejected. Like I think that is something that he illustrates through marriage. And at the same time, like I've had sex, it's great, I love it, it's important, but I mean it's not the most, like it's not the most amazing thing. Like it's not the end all be all. Like it's amazing and so important, but I mean there's couples who, for whatever reason can't have sex anymore and still have an amazingly sexually intimate relationship. And sex is so much more than just the act of intercourse. And I think that's important in the conversation too. But also, like, as someone who has gone from an environment that is all your peers and the dating pool is everyone, and then you move on from there and you're like, where is the dating pool? They are all gone. Like it can be so frustrating, which is why I celebrate social media in that way, because like in a sense, like it does keep that dating pool open. And on the other hand, I think Adam is right, asking the right question. And it's a question we should ask all the time. Like, why am I here? And that should be your question when you're scrolling on social media. Like if you're lonely and you're curious about your sexuality, like probably scrolling through your ex-girlfriend's feed is not the place to be. Like you are just going to find yourself more lonely and depressed than you were before, because why are you there? Well, you're there to try to get something that is not going to be given to you there. And so it's growing that awareness and understanding of yourself to know when you are going off the rails a little bit. And then, I mean, it's the same way, when you're on a date with your spouse, if you are on your phone the whole time and then you forget why you're there, which is to connect with your spouse, then, you missed it. I mean, that can be anything. You go to your job during the day and you're spaced out doing who knows what, like you're still not experiencing what you should be experiencing in that moment. So, I mean, I have been there. I have been in the loss, or I would just literally bawled my eyes out in a fetal position in a field, just cried myself to sleep, just lonely and sad. But God is with you in those moments. And I think that is an uncomfortable thing to hear. And I want to say that with the modifier of like, I have been in that situation, and it took like a year and a half plus to even like start thinking about like, oh, like this doesn't always have to be the way it is. Like God does have people for me. Like he does have relationship for me. It just takes so long. And I mean, I say the same thing in conversations I have about suicide and depression. Like when you are feeling smothered by something that you can't control and something that is just breaking your heart, just the blinders go completely up and you can't see, you can't feel, you can't think straight. And I mean, that can lead you to panic attacks. It can suicidal thoughts, it's just so hard in those moments to step outside yourself to see what's true. Like when I get in those moments, like all rationality is gone, and I like, you have to have people like you can talk to and verbalize those things. And like you're probably going to end up with the same frustrations and questions, but like the more that stuff comes to the light, the more those frustrations come to the light, the more healing that you find. And that was kind of my philosophy moving on from there, is like, I'm done with like trying to figure this out myself and being frustrated with it. I'm just going to continue to basically just vomit it out. Like, and it's more painful that way at the beginning, but it goes away. I mean, like who wants to vomit? It's very uncomfortable. But after you vomited a couple times, you start to feel better. And like, it's that continual just purging of those things so you can find healing. And I think that loneliness is the same thing. I mean, the devil wants to send you to isolation. He wants to isolate you and separate you. His plan is to attack you. He wants to get you away from the flock, away from the other sheep where you're vulnerable and it's easy to
Yeah.
destroy you. So like as as difficult as it is to like connect and trust people when you feel lonely, it becomes all the more important because you will become lost in yourself. And I think that's where like if you have a great family that comes in, if you have a great church or that comes in. But the frustrating part is like, what's the study that's like, I don't know how many people they asked, but like most people can't even think of like two trusted friends they would tell everything to. Like if they were in trouble, they don't even know who they would call.
Mm.
So like in that same way, as you are searching for someone to spend your life with, which I don't think is a shameful
Mm.
mission. I don't think
Mm.
it's a shameful plan. But as you're doing that, like you have to count up the cost. Like there is an attack going on around you. If you put your blinders just on this thing, like you are going to get like sideswiped by this loneliness, and you have to continue to have these people you're talking to, that you're praying with, that are coming alongside you to strengthen you. And this is why I think there's such a frustration and loneliness in young adults in this extended adolescence that Adam was talking about, because there's marriage conference after marriage conference, and then we have young adults in this longer and longer period of singleness, and it looks different in every season. I mean, being single when you're 21 looks very different from being single when you're 26, looks very different from your 30s, from your 40s. And like you can still have that desire, those frustrations, but it's gonna look really different. And I think something that was really helpful to me in that time was like having a multifaceted approach, like still pursuing those relationships, but also like pouring out to God what I was feeling in as an embarrassingly and awkwardly as possible, like in my journals. And like I would like do painting and things, and these are things that I would be so embarrassed to like say out loud or tell someone. And like I can read them back now and be like, oh my gosh, that was so stupid, like why did I feel that way?
Mhm.
Like that's
Yeah.
so like not reality. But I mean, God wants to meet you in that honesty. And the more that, like, for me, it's always shame. So, like, the more you're ashamed of it and more you hide it, the less you're going to find healing from those things. And then you need to find people, mentors who are in the same space as you or speaking to where you're at. Like, and maybe it's not people in your direct circle. Maybe it is like, Julie Sottery. For me, it was just a great person. I needed to hear what she had to say. And I needed to, find people who were married that would let me ask questions about sex, would let me think about it. Because I think Matt Chandler said this, like, the devil's scheme for your sexuality is to like push as hard as possible for you to have sex before you're married, and then after you're married to get you to not have sex at all, because like that's where the intimacy is torn apart. Like God's design is for you to be sexually intimate with your spouse, and before be
Uh-oh. Well, I'm sure what Annette was going to say was going to be really,
it's
really good. We lost you there for a second, and actually, we're
to
still
be in
losing
that
you.
spot, especially.
Oh,
Oh, am I dying?
well, you were dying for a little bit. That's all right.
Sorry,
That's all right.
my
No
connection
worries.
was anyway. I was just I got on my pulpit. But yeah, all that to say, like, if you're single and you want to be married and you are not there and it's exhausting and frustrating to you, you're not alone. You're very heard. Like God gets that, and that's more and more people's experience. So you like definitely have people to rally around you. And it's important to grieve that, and also like you also don't have to stay there. I mean, the thing about grief is it fluctuates. Like you can be super sad one minute and perfectly happy and hanging out with your friends the next, and like that's okay. God, that scatterbrainness, like God welcomes it. Just
Mhm.
pray all the crazy prayers that you have. um and yeah, I am of the philosophy that you lean into it. If something hurts, you just lean into it as hard as
Yeah.
possible. and say, you know, God, where are you going to meet me here? Like, I know that you're going to meet me. Let you are near to the brokenhearted because that's what you promised. Like, I know that you have designed me this way, and I know it's not a lie. So like something is here that I'm missing. And how can I I always push it. That's just I'm the fight, not the flight. I push in as hard as I can and say, God, what is this? Like wrestle with him. Like he wants to fight with you about it because he's like, no, I get it. Let's talk about it. Let's fight about it. Like there is goodness for you even in this. Like even so, there's still goodness for you in that. So
Well, what you're talking about, I mean, yeah, healing and deliverance comes through honesty. It does not come through deception or lying to oneself. It can't. Um, A- Adam makes fun of himself that he takes some time to process some things. Well, that's great, Adam. Well, it took me 5 years to really understand what had happened back when I was in college, and so that makes me angry. Like, wait a minute, shouldn't I have just like pieced that together over 5 years? But what happens, to Annette's point, is if you run from those feelings, you deny it, and then you bury it as soon as you're in another relationship. You don't deal with it. And then you're like, well, why didn't that work out? I thought that's what love was. No, it wasn't. Well, why not? Oh, because I've had a taste of what that unconditional love is. So, oh, I need to deal with that. So, like that was a big thing for me, and I went from anger and confusion because I never felt that way before, and then it was, oh well, okay, well I'll just go look for it, and so then I couldn't find it, and then that was a realization of, well, why, because it was very special. Adam, would how do you see loneliness, um and not just for the single people in your life, and not just like I'm not asking you to respond necessarily to me, but how do you fight loneliness while being married, and what is your advice to people who are in relationships who are struggling with loneliness?
That's a great question. For me, um, I think honestly, to avoid loneliness, and again, I can only speak to my own experience and kind of how I process, but I think honesty is huge, specifically in a marriage. I mean, obviously, people always talk about communication and different things like that, but it's really true. Like I feel most alone. I feel like I've throughout my life, looking back, I've felt most alone when I feel like I can't be honest about whatever it is I'm experiencing or whatever it is that I'm feeling. So, you know, when I feel like I can't be honest with my wife, like I feel alone in that, and like I avoid conflict like the plague. Any Enneagram nines out there, they know. Annette's husband is an Enneagram 9. Shout out to the nines. But um, I avoid conflict like the plague. That's not my only trait, but it is one of them. And so there are many, many moments where because I fear the conflict, I disproportionately minimize my own feelings or my own experience as being unimportant, or even my own opinion as being unimportant. So maybe in a moment, Emily says something that hurts my feelings. And, in that moment, I know my feelings are hurt, but it's just not worth bringing up. Like, it's not worth bringing up like another thing in that moment, because I want the moment to be over. I guess I just want to move past it. I want to forget about it. And in the moment, it's like, I'll just numb this. I'll just bottle this because it's not important. But then, like, in that moment, like, because I'm minimizing my own feelings, like I don't feel like I can be honest with Emily about how I heard what she said. Maybe she didn't mean to hurt my feelings, but it did for some reason. And yeah. So in that instance, like, so recognizing that, and I've had many moments where I just need to get over, like, it's like I need to tell Emily that I'm upset. I need to tell Emily that that she hurt my feelings because like she doesn't know it. Like, and that vulnerability opens up opportunity for a conversation that leads to reconciliation, that leads to better understanding for next time. So me recognizing that I need to be honest and open with what I'm actually feeling and experiencing, but then also welcome the same kind of critique and the same kind of communication. So I need to be welcoming and open to Emily to express, to be vulnerable, to express what she's feeling, express what she's thinking, because Emily is a feeler before she's a thinker. She gets upset first, and then she realizes later and is able to verbalize why she's upset. So, she gets upset because I've done or said something, and or didn't do something, and she's upset and she needs to be by herself for a little bit, and then she comes to me later, and then she's like, you know what, I think that when you didn't do this, or when you did this, like it really, did this to me, or hurt me in this way or whatever. And then, which again opens up opportunity for me to apologize, and for reconciliation to happen, and for better understanding to happen. Right. So I think, to avoid that loneliness within a relationship, is just to be honest, and to be honest when you're feeling lonely. Like, and there have been seasons where like, it's a little bit of a different thing, I guess. There have been seasons where I felt lonely that had nothing to do with Emily and I's relationship. Because Emily and I are one. And while, yes, it is two, like it is two become one. So on the one hand, like yes, community and company and those kinds of things are easier for me because we are two. But there are moments, there are times where sometimes we are in so we agree so much because we are one, that I feel lonely because no one else thinks the way that I do. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like there have been seasons in the last couple of years where I'm just like Emily, like I know Emily and I agree on this thing, but like, why does no one else? Or why, or like, just not even like, it's not even about agreeing on stuff. It's just like not having a bunch of close friends, like where I live, and that I like not being able to be vulnerable. Like I'm not able to be vulnerable with people here in the same way that I'm vulnerable with guys on D group. Right. And like, that's like, we've talked about that. Yeah. We've talked about that numerous times, in that like, it's 9 years. I mean, and those relationships are 9 years in the making, when I've only been here 2, right? Relationships take time.
Sure.
Take a lot of time. Brief, not an offshoot, but going back to something that Annette said, 2 things that Annette said. She was talking about, I was in this space and it took me a year and a half to get to the other side of it, or get not to even to the other side, but get to a place where I could start thinking differently. I think that just as kind of a, not general advice, I guess, but I think that our generation and younger needs reminders that good things take time. Relationships take time. Getting over these, not getting over, but just like working through these things takes time. And then also, I think this also goes with like how to avoid loneliness. And we could talk about this in the realm of social media and other things too, but I feel like learning how to listen well is good, because Annette, you were talking about things like you and Michael share particular experiences that I don't, or I haven't, at least not in the same way. So like I mean, you're able to empathize in a different way, which is amazing. But then it just brought to mind for me, like, you also had mentioned, like, you need to have people you can go to. You need to know who those people are, who you can go to just talk it out, lean into it, talk it out, really, really, just process and express and all those different things. And I feel like the thing that came to mind for me, so this is maybe, I want to be a good listener. I want to know how to genuinely listen to someone, not for the purpose of inserting my own opinion after they're done, or or doing, I don't know, just like, so like if Michael were to ever call me, or someone I know, or like there have been other D group members who I've had some
I would never call you, Adam. Sorry.
I mean, you would call Dan first, and that's fine. I know that. But when Dan's not available, or when Dan's being obstinate like he is, you call me. So
no.
Anyway, but anyway, like I think the art of listening, and not the art of listening void of the intent to then persuade the other person of how they're wrong, like,
or to debate or be argumentative, or
right,
make the
or
conversation then about yourself.
Right. Yes. Or to diminish that other person's experience. Like, it's like, that's not so rough. Like, I mean, I know that you're lonely right now, but like, I mean, it's like, it's not that big a deal. Like, how horrible, how awful,
That are dying and you're single and you think you got it bad.
Oh man. Anyway, so those are just the last couple thoughts that came to me.
I think that's amazing. I just did my first funeral last week, and by the way, Adam, I think that you are a great listener. I'm somebody who needs to get better at that. In fact, that's what my message to group last week. I need to shut up more. But I just did my first funeral. It was the day before Thanksgiving, of all days to do it. And this lady had lived a full life. I did not know her at all. I wouldn't be able to pick her out of a police lineup if she was the only one in the police lineup. Like, is that Maxine? I don't know, because I've never met her. So it was a tremendous service, because it was, we want to emphasize three things. I talk about in the church, is that we want to mourn the death of the person. We want to acknowledge the pain. We want to grieve. Annette has said that earlier, similar themes here. We want to celebrate the life, because when we mourn somebody, that's a privilege, because that means they were worth mourning and worth missing. And then we want to proclaim victory over the grave through Christ Jesus, that, our dear sister, our dear brother, we're going to see them again someday. So during the time of testimonials, like, I think the best thing I heard, and one of the highest compliments I've ever heard during a funeral, is that this was from the family, as well as some congregants in my church, is that this lady listened well and did not slander or gossip at all. You would never hear her talk bad about somebody or talk behind someone's back. And she was always willing to listen. And her daughter in particular said that my mom would stop whatever she was doing, and she would just listen with like a mother's heart, just hearing people. And I think there's a different understanding. And you're about to be a father here, Adam. So in a few years, when your daughter, tells you something, you'll be able to hear what they're saying and understand the English, but hearing and understanding the heart, that's what requires the attentiveness. That's what requires the us to get out of our own way and stop that narcissism, stop the ulterior motive, and say, oh, let me just give you advice, which us men, and then I'm sorry, we fall prone to it. Like, can't you just listen to me? No, we gotta fix it all the time. Don't you understand?
In our relationship, so not a guy girl thing. I just want to.
Oh, fair enough. What are we doing? I guess that's the thing. Are we there to serve ourselves, even in relationships, or are we there to serve each other? And Adam, I definitely can see the correlation there, and like loneliness can come in many forms. Coincidentally, the realization of the fact that I was in love and I will always care for this person even though they're living their life now. They are married, they have kids, they are doing what they need to do. I have grieved, I have moved on. Not moved on. I say, how do you fully move on from feelings? It's not like people are going to just turn into jerks. It's like, no, I think I'm always going to care for you. I'm always going to have that affection, but there's boundaries. Unfortunately, that's been coinciding with two relationships that have spanned over a decade and a half, two separate friendships. One was 15 years, one was 21 years, and they've ended both in this last year. And I mean, completely like just ended. It's not a, well, they ghosted me. It's just done. And I'm like, my heart has been so hurt in this last few months because of that. And then adding this on top of it, I have never been more grateful for D group because the peer group here immediately, which I have a lot of lady friends that are just friends. I'm not a player or anything. They're just really good friends. But like finding good men, other good men around here other than my D group guys is hard. It's very hard. There's somebody to hang out with and just spend time with, and that just is there. So Adam, I hear you, and it just sometimes it just sucks, and sometimes we just have to say, okay, God, this is what I'm dealing with. To Annette, to your whole point, and that's where I'm at. I'm just in that acceptance mode of grief. Like, okay, this is what it is. It's terrible. God knows it. I know it now. And now I can begin to move on. I can deal with those emotions instead of burying them, which I've so foolishly done. I appreciate both of your insight into that. Um, Final question here, and this is something that only you both will be able to speak on, as I'm at a disadvantage. I'm not being married. But what we are talking about here, and that brought this up earlier, is this idea of completion and being fulfilled. So, Adam, I'll throw this to you first, and that you could have the last word. How do you find the spiritual fulfillment within your marriage? And those high moments and those low moments, how do you find that consistent spiritual fulfillment that doesn't lead to, like, well, I'm in love one day and I'm mad the next day, so I'm going to get a divorce. You fall in love, you get married, you fall out of love, you get divorced. It's just a feeling that you get. So how do you still find that on those days where it's just difficult? Because everyone has the difficult days, and that's where it really is revealed what your relationship is built on. Is it built on the social media, like fake that you were saying, that is, superficial but helpful maybe in some cases, or is it rooted in something so much deeper?
I hmm. It's funny that you mentioned difficult days, just because, like, I don't know, Emily and I have had a couple difficult ones, like just this week. Which, I mean, that's not to say that like we're not like actively fighting. Like our difficult days are very easy compared to some. Um, but um, I think that, even acknowledging in those moments, because both those times, both or the couple difficulties that we've had have been primarily because like I was not spiritually grounded this week, and I was the one who ended up causing the hurt in the relationship. And it's funny, as I say that, Emily just texted me and she said, "It's both of us, not just you. Don't take all the blame." Where we weren't spiritually grounded this week, and that caused some issues. So I think, I know that I had, while there was an uncertainty, while there was a tension, while there was a conflict that needed to be resolved, I and because of that tension, like I didn't have peace, but I also had an underlying peace because of our commitment to each other, that was made in Christ and modeled after Christ's commitment to us, to his church, to his people. And I often say, I don't often communicate this very well to my students, or just to people in general, but like, I don't understand how people like people who essentially like they live together and they act as if they're married, but they're not. Like, and I'm not trying to talk about like, cohabitation or whatever. I'm just talking about like people, that like they live together, they have kids, they share finances, all these different things, but they're not married. And a lot of it, and there's a million different reasons for that. But like, I know some Christians as well who've kind of like, who either have done that or considered it an option. And like, that scares me to death. Like, there's a but that I won't go to right now. I don't know. Like, Emily and I, like, like in the Old Testament, there wasn't like a marriage ceremony where you stood before God and said like, I do, right? Like, that wasn't like an Old Testament thing, right? Like, so I understand that like our pomp and circumstance revolving around marriage and these different things are while they are historical, they could be. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. But like, Emily and I made a commitment to God together. Like, we both said that, like, for better or worse, we are committed to each other. And again, modeling that commitment that Christ made to us, then like modeling the commitment of God's relationship with his people, the fickle and unfaithful Israelites who time and time again wandered from Christ. They were unfaithful. And yet God said like, but I love you, So I think that part of the spiritual, fulfillment, or the spiritual fulfillment comes from just a mutual understanding of like, I'm gonna do this with you, like,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Like,
having somebody that's there again. You talked about the oneness, the completeness. I'm just hearing you
right,
pick up on if I'm hearing you correctly,
right,
listening.
yes,
Is having somebody there that has your best interest, and then letting that, I don't say speak for itself maybe, but what I hear you saying is having that confidence that you have each other's best interest at heart, keeping that at the center no matter what the bad days are. That's what brings that fulfillment.
I think so. Yeah. I was trying to think if there was another element to that or not, but I think that's the thing that's on my mind most currently. So maybe
Yeah.
that speaks to someone. I don't know.
Yeah, well, because I was there. I mean, I'll brag because I was there when you said your vows, which was beautiful, by the way. That even when I think, is this potentially the big difference between how we as Christians act in a marriage and how others do, is that our marriages and relationships are supposed to reflect a relationship of mercy instead of vindictiveness, shame. That even when we sin against one another, there's not an aspect of maliciousness. There's I'm gonna love you forever, love you exclusively, and on your worst day, I am not gonna love you any less. And I'm gonna grant you mercy, and you're going to bestow mercy upon me, and I'm not going anywhere. It seems like that's that commitment, that proclamation that you say in front of other Christian witnesses, saying just as what Christ did for the church, that type of love, that type of sacrifice, that's going to be the bedrock of our marriage. So no matter what, it just is. Adam is one with Emily. Emily is Adam. Adam is Emily. They're not separated from one another. It just is. It's not conditional. It's what it's supposed to be. Is that maybe what you're trying to say? Maybe, I don't know.
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Good, because it sounds good, even though I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Oh man, I don't know. I just, and there's so much that could be said about like spiritual fulfillment, but like like there are different maybe compartments to that in my head. But I'm just trying to think of like spiritually fulfilled. Like, I mean, you could talk about like, in being, encouraging one another to like encouraging one another in your faith. You could talk about like just being like pointing each other to Christ, or just being Christ to one another. I don't know. There are a lot of things that you could talk about, but I think, again, like just in this moment, the things that I'm thinking about this week, I have found fulfillment and peace and joy and love in our mutual commitment to one another. So
I love it. I love it. And that last word to you on spiritual fulfillment within marriage. How do you find that? How do you find that contentment, even in a relationship? Where does the Holy Spirit play in that? I'm just curious of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the dangerous things we do is to expect our spouse to be our spiritual fulfillment when they're not. I mean, you're still individually connected to Christ. And I think it's important to remember that scripture is, when in eternity you're not married. And sometimes we might could talk about that. We'll just cry a little bit because we love each other. But like the reality is like that situation is beyond our comprehension, like how beautiful and completely fulfilled that will be. But I think something that we will be is like people who know each other very vulnerably, very intimately, and people who have been a reflection and a mirror of Christ's love for us. So I think that's one of the reasons that, Paul talks about singleness. The way Paul talks about it is that, singleness is the varsity and marriage is the JV almost. Is like saying, stay single if you can, because that's, God's got, when you're married, you're going to think about your spouse, you're going to have troubles in that. And I think that's one of the parts of counting up the cost. The feelings don't just carry you through. Like feelings are real, but they're not final, and they do change. But when it comes to like spiritual fulfillment, what Mike and I are to each other is partners. I mean, we're partners on mission for what God designed us to do together. Like we seek out together, like, God, we submit and we're thankful you brought us to each other. And we recognize that that is for a purpose that is beyond us being complete in ourselves. We recognize us being together is to bring you glory. And ultimately, like what we do, how we serve each other, how we love each other is part of that mission. And then there's also a mission of service outside of each other. Like our marriage has to be edifying to the church. It has to be edifying to our neighbors. It has to be edifying in all of these ways. Like we we have the benefit of having someone to build us up and be our cheerleader and hold our arms up and fight with us. And you also have the challenge of someone else seeing all of your flaws, all of your sin very openly, very clearly. Like, so there are so many pros and cons in that. And I think in this single married conversation, like that's one of those counting up the cost things is like, there's challenging and great things on either side, whether you're single or married. And being single, you can be equally as spiritually fulfilled as someone who is married. Like there is no, God is not giving an extra dose of grace or an extra dose of fulfillment or contentment to those who are married. Like he is illustrating his love and his narrative in a different way, because he's given us the church, because he's given us adoption. I mean, it's not good for man to be alone. So we have all of this community around us. And, you know, some of us in this season are in a calling of marriage and a mission of marriage, and some of us are in a mission of singleness, and all of that is good, and all that is spiritually fulfilling. Like, there is equality in that, because God is the one giving the favor and giving the merit. Like, I think spiritual fulfillment in your relationship is being able to see and know the other person and bring them to the feet of Jesus so they can continually find healing and strength and sanctification. Like, I think in your marriage partnership, it's the same as it is in a D group. I mean, it's about your growth. It's about, through vulnerability, you're experiencing more of God. You're experiencing more of who God is. And then in that, I mean, God does a really cool thing by like giving us different roles in our relationship. Like, you know, I have a more dominant, aggressive personality than Micah, but I mean, he still shows me how God uses him for leadership. He teaches me how to be a helper and a partner and use my power in sexuality, that we are companions, we're building each other up. So it just, I mean, it's such a unique expression of who God is. And I think, speaking from a woman's perspective, there is a battle to fight if you grew up in the church, to reframe the idea of like your husband being your spiritual leader, in the sense of recognizing that a husband being a spiritual leader does not mean that you are powerless, and recognizing like your role as the female in the relationship is so beautiful, is so wonderful, because you have such a power as the Azer, as the helper, as not his Holy Spirit, but serving more in the role of the Holy Spirit, to come along, to cheerlead, to come beside, to bolster, to provide wise and sage counsel, you know, so that your husband can go to war for you, could die for you if he needs to, just the way that, you know, Christ would die for the church. So, what that plays out like in your marriage, I think, is so unique to who you are, how God designed you, your personality, your specific mission that you are called to as a married couple. I mean, there's just so much nuance in it all, which is so good and like yummy. I love it that God would be so kind to us to give us such unique design. So like, for you and how you pray together and how you build each other up and how you serve together, that's going to look different. But I would say, overarchingly, you find spiritual fulfillment in your marriage by being on mission together, by, like Adam said, by being one together, moving in the same direction together. I mean, you are still just the branches. You're not the vine. You're still abiding. You're still growing together in this way, in this direction, in this light. So, I mean, I'll wrap it up with this illustration. It's kind of like if you were climbing like a cliff face, and you are like attached by a rope to the other person. Like, you're gonna have to fight to struggle up this mountain. I mean, if you're a solo climber and you're free climbing, like, you're responsible for you. If you're marriage climbing, there's gonna be times they're gonna lift you up. There's gonna be times the other person is heavy. Like, you're gonna fight back and forth to work your way up this mountain. But like, ultimately, we're like still on this cliff face, moving in one direction, on mission, like experiencing this wonderful, awesome thing, this mission that God has for us. So, I hope that is a good answer to your question.
Oh,
But
I
I
love that
think the thing to
illustration.
remember is different for everyone. It's just so unique.
Yeah. I think these conversations need to take place more often, and I am so grateful that you all set aside the time tonight to pour into this. This was I think, a very much needed conversation for more ways than one, and it's something that I'd like to continue. And that's what this podcast, "We Shall Not Sleep," is for. Um, and I'm so grateful to you, Annette, to you and Micah. That's what I thought. It's so great to be able to see another couple that I can trust with what they're saying, trust their motive and their upbringing to be honest, but then have that type of motivation. I mean, I think if people haven't fallen in love with your hearts and what you're coming at this point, that's their loss. And so very thankful, guys. I appreciate your time. Uh, Merry Christmas to you. We're right here. We're coming up on the third week of Advent. What a cool time here. And I hope you both have a very safe rest of 2021. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine you saying that. But Merry Christmas to you all and Happy New Year.
Thank you. You as well.
Love you, Michael. Love you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much to Adam and Annette for their time and insight during tonight's episode. I hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as much as I did and were able to glean some things that you can apply to your daily walk with Christ and your relationships. We will catch you next time on the We Shall Not Sleep podcast. Thank you again for your support. And as always, may God bless you and may God keep you.